Sir, I need you to empty your pockets.
Empty my pockets? Are you insane?
Standard procedure for suspicious individuals. Suspicious? I'm a customer. I haven't stolen anything.
Then you won't mind proving it.
I absolutely mind. You have no legal authority to search me. I have authority to protect this store and its customers.
Not from me, you don't.
Look, we can do this easy or we can do this hard.
Yes. I'm giving you a choice.
Comply or I call the police.
Call whoever you want.
The confrontation was happening in broad daylight at Westfield Shopping Center, the kind of upscale mall where families spend Saturday afternoons and teenagers hang out after school. The electronics store buzzed with the usual weekend energy. Parents comparing tablet prices, kids testing gaming systems, couples debating smartphone upgrades. But in the back corner near the laptop displays, a situation was spiraling completely out of control. Quick pause. I love seeing how global our community is getting. Let me know in the comments which part of the world are you tuning in from today. Also, if you value independent storytelling that digs deeper for the truth, please hit that subscribe button. Your support is the only way we can keep exposing these untold stories. Officer Nolan Pierce stood with his chest puffed out, one hand hovering near his radio, the other pointing accusingly at the man in front of him. At 28 years old, Pierce had been working mall security for exactly 3 months and 14 days. He'd been hired after a brief stint at a big box retailer where he'd been let go for what management called overly aggressive customer interactions. The security company had been desperate to fill positions and Pierce's application showed enthusiasm, even if his references were lukewarm at best. Pierce had a theory about mall security that he developed watching YouTube videos and reading online forums about loss prevention. He believed in being proactive, in stopping problems before they escalated, in making his presence known to potential troublemakers. What he called vigilance, others might call profiling. In his 3 months on the job, he generated 14 incident reports, 12 complaints to management, and 0 actual arrests or recovered stolen merchandise. But Pierce was convinced he was good at his job. He prided himself on being able to spot suspicious behavior from across a crowded store. The way someone walked too slowly through aisles, how they picked up items and put them back down repeatedly, when they spent too much time in one section without making purchases. Today he'd been watching the black man in the electronics section for 23 minutes, and every instinct Pierce had was screaming that something wasn't right. The man was tall, probably mid-40s, with the kind of posture that suggested either military background or just natural confidence. He wore a green polo shirt and dark jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing that should have attracted attention. But Pierce had noticed him immediately when he'd entered the store 45 minutes earlier. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to belong in spaces where Pierce felt he had to prove himself worthy. For the past 20 minutes, the man had been methodically examining laptops and tablets, reading specifications, comparing prices, occasionally taking notes on his phone. Normal customer behavior by any reasonable standard. But Pierce saw something else entirely. The man was clearly casing expensive electronics, probably planning to come back later with a crew to steal high-value items. The way he kept checking his phone was obviously coordinating with accomplices. The notes he was taking were mapping security camera blind spots. Pierce's radio crackled to life. His supervisor, Carla Esposito, was checking in on routine rounds. Pierce, status report. Everything quiet in electronics. Pierce keyed his radio, his eyes never leaving the man who was now examining a high-end gaming laptop.
Caught a situation developing here. Supervisor.
Suspicious individual engaging in pre-theft surveillance, requesting permission to intervene. Suspicious how? Is he damaging merchandise? Threatening customers? Negative on direct action, but the behavioral patterns are textbook. He's been here over 20 minutes, handling expensive items, taking notes, checking his phone repeatedly. I'm reading this as reconnaissance for future theft. There was a pause on the radio. Carla Esposito had 15 years of security experience and had worked with dozens of officers like Pierce, eager, inexperienced, and prone to seeing threats where none existed. Pierce, unless you observe actual criminal behavior, maintain visual contact only. Do not engage without clear evidence of wrongdoing. But Pierce was already moving. He'd studied the manual, he'd watched the training videos, he knew that preventing theft was more effective than recovering stolen goods after the fact. He approached the man with what he thought was professional authority. "Excuse me, sir. I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." The man looked up from the laptop he'd been examining, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to immediate wariness. Pierce recognized that look, the defensive posture of someone who knew they'd been caught. "Questions about what? I'm shopping for a laptop. Right. Shopping. Sure. Pierce's tone made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. I've been observing your behavior for the past 20 minutes. You've been handling multiple high-value items without making purchases, taking extensive notes, frequently checking your phone. That's not shopping behavior. That's surveillance behavior. The man's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained level. I'm comparing specifications and prices. It's called being a careful consumer. Maybe you've heard of it. Pierce felt his authority being challenged, and his training had taught him that allowing challenges to go unchecked was how situations got out of control. He stepped closer, using his body language to establish dominance. That's when he made his demand about emptying pockets. That's when the situation had exploded into the confrontation that would destroy his career and cost his employer more money than Pierce would earn in his entire lifetime. That's when Pierce had gone from security guard to unemployment statistic in the span of a single conversation. As Pierce reached for his radio to call for backup, he had no idea that the man he was harassing had the authority to deploy military police, command surveillance operations across 3 states, or make phone calls that could shut down entire security companies with a single conversation. Pierce thought he was dealing with a potential shoplifter. He was actually confronting someone whose daily decisions affected the lives of 15,000 soldiers, and whose monthly budget exceeded the annual revenue of the entire shopping center. The call was about to go out. Backup was about to arrive. And Officer Nolan Pierce was about to learn that some mistakes cost more than jobs. They cost companies millions, destroy reputations, and turn routine shopping trips into federal cases that make national news. Pierce keyed his radio one final time. Supervisor, I need immediate backup in electronics. Uncooperative subject refusing lawful security procedures. Escalation imminent. What happened next would be captured by 17 different security cameras, recorded by 14 civilian phones, and witnessed by dozens of Saturday afternoon shoppers. But more importantly, it would be witnessed by the wrong person. Someone who had spent 25 years learning how to turn authority challenges into career-ending consequences for anyone stupid enough to issue them. Officer Nolan Pierce had always believed he was destined for something bigger than retail work. Growing up in suburban Cleveland, he'd watched too many action movies and absorbed too many internet theories about how the world really worked. At 28, he'd bounced between jobs, Target loss prevention, Best Buy customer service, a brief stint as a parking enforcement officer that ended when he issued 47 tickets in a single day and generated 23 formal complaints. Each termination reinforced his belief that he was simply too dedicated, too thorough, too willing to do what others wouldn't. When Westfield Shopping Center Security Company posted an opening, Pierce saw it as his opportunity to finally find an employer who would appreciate his vigilance. The interview had been brief. The company was desperate to fill positions after losing 3 guards in 2 weeks. One fired for sleeping on duty, another for harassment complaints, a third who simply stopped showing up. Pierce's enthusiasm impressed the hiring manager, even if his references were lukewarm. His previous supervisor at Best Buy had noted that Pierce was eager to identify problems, but also sometimes sees issues where none exist. Pierce's training had lasted exactly 8 hours spread over 2 days. Loss prevention basics, radio procedures, when to call real police, and a brief overview of customer rights. The manual stressed de-escalation and observation over confrontation. Pierce had nodded along, but privately believed the training was too passive, too willing to let potential criminals operate unchallenged. He'd supplemented the official training with YouTube videos about retail security and online forums where guards shared war stories about catching shoplifters. In his 3 months at Westfield, Pierce had filed more incident reports than any other guard. A teenager trying on sunglasses for 10 minutes, clearly planning theft. A woman returning multiple times to look at jewelry, obviously coordinating with accomplices. An elderly man sitting on a bench for 30 minutes, suspicious loitering with criminal intent. Every report had been reviewed and dismissed. Every complaint against Pierce had been filed and forgotten. The security company was too understaffed to be picky about officers who generated paperwork. Pierce lived alone in a studio apartment, 20 minutes from the mall, spending his off hours reading security blogs and watching videos about criminal behavior patterns. He'd never been married, had few friends, and found purpose in his self-appointed role as protector of public spaces. In his mind, he was the thin blue line between order and chaos, even though he wore a black uniform and carried only a radio and a flashlight. But the man Pierce was confronting had spent the last 25 years in a different kind of protective service. Colonel Elias Thorne had commanded soldiers in 3 combat zones, briefed Pentagon officials on regional security threats, and managed military operations with budgets that exceeded most small countries' GDP. At 47 years old, he was responsible for Fort Henderson, a sprawling military installation that housed 15,000 active duty personnel and their families. His decisions affected supply chains across 7 states, training programs that prepared soldiers for deployment, and security protocols that protected critical military assets. Thorne had graduated from West Point with honors, earned a master's degree in strategic studies from the Army War College, and completed advanced training in counterintelligence, logistics management, and international relations. He'd served as a platoon leader in Afghanistan, a company commander in Iraq, and a battalion commander at Fort Bragg before accepting his current position as base commander. His service record included 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, and commendations from 4 different commanding generals. His daily routine involved briefings on global security threats, coordination with congressional oversight committees, and decisions that affected everything from local economic development to national defense readiness. He managed an annual budget of $2.3 billion, supervised civilian contractors across 14 states, and maintained relationships with defense industry executives, government officials, and foreign military liaisons. When Thorne spoke, colonels listened. When he made recommendations, generals acted. When he identified problems, entire departments mobilized to solve them. But on this Saturday afternoon, Thorne wasn't thinking about military strategy or defense budgets. He was thinking about his daughter. Mia Kessler was turning 16 tomorrow, and Thorne had promised her something special. Not just any gift, but the laptop she'd been researching for months. Something powerful enough for her graphic design aspirations, portable enough for school, reliable enough to last through college. Mia was brilliant, creative, and destined for art school, if her portfolio continued developing at its current pace. She'd inherited her mother's artistic eye and her father's analytical mind, a combination that produced stunning digital artwork that impressed even Thorne's technology-savvy staff officers. Thorne had been deployed for Mia's 14th birthday and stuck in Pentagon meetings for her 15th. This year, he blocked out his entire weekend to make sure her 16th birthday was perfect. The laptop was the centerpiece, but he'd also planned a surprise party with her friends, arranged for her favorite restaurant to cater, and coordinated with the base's graphic design team to provide Mia with professional mentorship opportunities. He'd done his research on laptops the way he approached military planning: thorough analysis of specifications, comparison of capabilities, evaluation of long-term value. He'd narrowed his choices to 3 models, but wanted to examine them in person before making a final decision. The sales associate had been helpful, explaining technical differences and answering detailed questions about graphics processing capabilities and software compatibility. Thorne had been taking notes because he planned to involve Mia in the final decision. She'd done her own research and had strong opinions about processor speeds and RAM configurations. The notes would help him present the options clearly, respecting her intelligence, while ensuring they chose something that would serve her needs for years. The phone calls had been coordination with his aide about tomorrow's party logistics and confirmation that the base's IT department could handle any software installation Mia might need. Everything about Thorne's behavior was methodical, careful, and completely normal for someone making a significant purchase decision. He'd been prepared to spend up to $3,000 on the right laptop, had multiple payment methods available, and could have completed the transaction immediately if he'd found the perfect match. Instead, he was being treated like a criminal by a mall security guard who couldn't imagine that a black man in casual clothes might outrank most of the military officers in the country. Thorne had dealt with racial profiling before. As a young lieutenant, he'd been questioned by base security, who couldn't believe he had legitimate access to classified areas. As a captain, he'd been stopped by local police, who found his presence in upscale neighborhoods suspicious. As a major, he'd been challenged by defense contractors who assumed he wasn't senior enough to make procurement decisions. But those incidents had taught him something that Nolan Pierce was about to learn the hard way. Authority without wisdom is dangerous. Power without accountability is destructive, and assumptions without evidence can cost everything. The radio crackled again. Backup was coming. Witnesses were gathering. Security cameras were recording. And Thorne was calculating exactly how much this mistake was going to cost everyone involved. Because when you've spent 25 years learning how to turn tactical disadvantages into strategic victories, dealing with an overconfident mall security guard becomes less a problem to endure than a lesson to teach. The backup arrived in less than 2 minutes. Officer Jake Morrison, a fellow security guard with 6 months more experience than Pierce, approached with the kind of swagger that suggested he was eager for action. Morrison had responded to Pierce's radio calls before and knew his partner had a talent for turning minor situations into major incidents. "What's the situation?" Morrison asked, positioning himself to block any potential exit routes. "Subject's been conducting surveillance for over 20 minutes. Refuses to comply with standard security procedures. Claims he's shopping but behavior indicates pre-theft reconnaissance," Pierce explained, using the terminology he'd memorized from online training videos. Thorne watched the tactical positioning with the kind of professional assessment that comes from 25 years of military service. 2 poorly trained security guards, no understanding of actual threat assessment, operating on assumptions rather than evidence. He'd seen similar overreactions from young soldiers who confused aggression with competence. "Gentlemen," Thorne said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made seasoned sergeants straighten their posture, "you're making a mistake that's going to cost everyone involved more than you can imagine." Pierce interpreted the warning as a threat. "Now he's threatening us," he told Morrison. "I think we need to call actual police." "Wait," Morrison said, studying Thorne more carefully. Unlike Pierce, Morrison had actually served in the National Guard and recognized something familiar in Thorne's bearing. "Sir, are you military?" "I am," Thorne replied. "Colonel, United States Army." Pierce laughed. "Yeah, right. Every guy who gets caught claims to be military. Next you'll be telling us you're a Navy SEAL." But Morrison stepped back slightly. He'd been around enough officers to recognize the real thing: the posture, the vocabulary, the way Thorne commanded space without moving. This wasn't someone pretending to be military. This was someone who actually was. By now a crowd had gathered. Owen Patel, the electronics store manager, approached nervously. "Officers, is there a problem? This gentleman has been a model customer, very polite, asking intelligent questions about our laptop selection." "Mr. Patel," Pierce said, feeling his authority challenged from multiple directions, "this individual has been engaging in suspicious behavior. As head of security for this section, I need you to step back and let us handle this." Patel looked confused. "Suspicious behavior? He's been shopping for 40 minutes. Ask about processor speeds, graphics capabilities, warranty options, normal customer behavior." 3 teenagers with phones had started recording. A woman with her children had stopped to watch. An elderly couple whispered to each other about what they were witnessing. Pierce could feel his control of the situation slipping away. "Everyone needs to clear the area," Pierce announced loudly. "This is a security matter." "No," Thorne said quietly. "This is a discrimination matter. And everyone here is now a witness to what happens next." That's when Pierce made the decision that would end his career. Instead of de-escalating, instead of calling his supervisor, instead of verifying Thorne's credentials, he reached for Thorne's arm. "Sir, you're coming with us to the security office for questioning." The moment Pierce's hand made contact, everything changed. Thorne didn't resist, didn't escalate, didn't give Pierce any legal justification for what came next. He simply stood there, letting security cameras and civilian phones record a mall security guard physically detaining a United States Army colonel for the crime of shopping while black. "You just made the biggest mistake of your professional life," Thorne said calmly. "I hope it was worth it." Carla Esposito had been responding to Pierce's radio calls all afternoon, each one more dramatic than the last. As head of mall security with 15 years of experience, she'd learned to recognize when situations were spiraling out of control. Pierce's latest transmission, physical detention of uncooperative subject in progress, had triggered every alarm bell in her professional judgment. She arrived at the electronics store to find a crowd of witnesses, multiple phones recording, and her least experienced officer physically restraining a man whose military bearing was obvious to anyone with eyes. Esposito took one look at the situation and knew her company was about to face a lawsuit that would make national news. "Pierce, what the hell are you doing?" she demanded, pushing through the gathered crowd. "Supervisor." Subject refused compliance with security protocols. Engaged in suspicious surveillance behavior. When questioned, he became belligerent and claimed to be military, Pierce reported, still gripping Thorne's arm. Esposito looked at Thorne, the posture, the calm expression, the way he carried himself despite being physically detained by mall security. She'd worked with enough off-duty police and military personnel to recognize the real thing. "Sir," she addressed Thorne directly, "I'm Carla Esposito, security supervisor. Can you provide identification?" Thorne reached slowly into his wallet and produced his military ID. The moment Esposito saw it, her face went white. "Department of Defense photograph, colonel rank insignia, Fort Henderson base assignment." This wasn't some weekend warrior with a fake credential. This was a full bird colonel in the United States Army. "Pierce, let go of him. Right now," she ordered. "The supervisor, anyone can." "Pierce, that's a real military ID. You're detaining a United States Army colonel. Let go of him immediately before you get us all arrested." The crowd had grown larger. Owen Patel stood nearby, shaking his head in disbelief. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear. The teenagers with phones had moved closer, making sure their cameras captured every moment of Pierce's humiliation. Pierce's grip loosened as the reality began to sink in. He's really military. He's really a colonel. Esposito confirmed. "Colonel, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Officer Pierce exceeded his authority and violated company protocol. This never should have happened." Thorne adjusted his shirt and looked directly at Pierce. "Officer Pierce, you just physically detained a commanding officer for the crime of shopping. Do you understand what you've done?" Pierce's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Around them, witnesses murmured to each other. The phones kept recording. The evidence kept building. "Sir," Esposito continued, "what can we do to resolve this situation?" Thorne's response was measured but unmistakable. "You can start by terminating Officer Pierce immediately. Then you can explain to your corporate headquarters why they're about to face a federal discrimination lawsuit. And then you can help me decide whether this incident gets reported to military police, civilian authorities, or both." Pierce's radio clattered to the floor as his hands started shaking. His career had just ended in the middle of a shopping mall, surrounded by witnesses, captured on multiple cameras, because he'd been too arrogant to recognize actual authority when it was standing right in front of him. The backup he'd called for had become witnesses to his professional destruction. Within 4 hours, the videos had exploded across social media. 14 different angles of a mall security guard physically detaining a United States Army colonel for shopping while black. The hashtags wrote themselves: Jun, shopping while black, military discrimination, security gone wrong. By evening, major news networks were running the story. By Monday morning, congressional representatives were demanding investigations. Pierce was terminated that same afternoon. Westfield Shopping Center's parent company issued an immediate statement distancing themselves from his actions. The security contractor that employed Pierce faced contract cancellation, insurance claims, and a corporate crisis that threatened their relationships with dozens of other clients. But the real consequences were just beginning. Thorne hired the law firm of Morrison, Chang and Associates, specialists in civil rights litigation with a track record of massive settlements against corporations that enabled discrimination. The lawsuit named Pierce, the security company, Westfield Shopping Center, and the parent corporation. The allegations were comprehensive: racial profiling, unlawful detention, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of federal civil rights laws. The evidence was overwhelming: security camera footage from 17 different angles, 14 civilian phone recordings, witness statements from store employees, customers, and other security personnel. Pierce's own radio transmissions documenting his assumptions and escalating aggression. Most damaging of all, Pierce's employment history showing a pattern of similar incidents that his employer had ignored. Discovery revealed that Pierce had generated 43 complaints in his brief security career across multiple employers. Complaints about racial profiling, excessive aggression, and harassment of customers. Every employer had simply moved him along rather than addressing the pattern. The security company had hired him despite references that should have disqualified him from any position involving public interaction. The case never went to trial. Corporate attorneys looked at the evidence and calculated the cost of a public courtroom battle versus a settlement. Video of a mall security guard manhandling an army colonel would play poorly to any jury, especially when that colonel commanded respect from generals and had served his country for 25 years. The settlement was announced 18 months later: $3.2 million paid to Colonel Elias Thorne, the largest discrimination settlement in the shopping center's history. Pierce's name was entered into national security databases, ensuring he would never work in any capacity involving public safety or customer interaction. But Thorne's victory wasn't just personal. He testified before Congress about discrimination against military families. His case prompted the Department of Defense to issue new guidelines protecting service members from civilian harassment. Mall security companies across the country implemented mandatory training programs specifically addressing racial bias and authority recognition. Pierce disappeared from public view. Local news reporters found him working at a warehouse outside Cleveland, making $12 an hour, living in the same studio apartment where he'd once studied security videos and dreamed of being a protector of public spaces. His 3-month career in security had cost him everything: employment prospects, professional reputation, and any chance of working in law enforcement or security again. Nia Kessler got her laptop the next day. Thorne had completed the purchase at a different store, but the birthday party proceeded as planned. She never learned the full details of what happened at the mall, but she understood that her father had faced something unfair and had fought back in an aid that would help other people. 6 months after the settlement, Thorne received a letter from a young black soldier who had been harassed by civilian security while visiting family. The soldier thanked Thorne for taking a stand, for using his position and resources to fight back, for proving that sometimes individual courage can create systemic change. Thorne kept that letter on his desk at Fort Henderson, a reminder that some battles are worth fighting not just for personal justice, but for everyone who comes after. And if you believe that speaking truth to power matters, that accountability creates change, and that standing up to discrimination protects everyone's rights, then hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep exposing these patterns, keep demanding better from the systems that are supposed to serve us, and keep supporting the people who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. This isn't just about one security guard or one colonel. It's about the world we choose to build together.